Hey guys, Allison from Project Motherhood here. I hope you're all having a great day. I'm ready for some real mom talk. So I wanted to just dive right into a topic that's really near and dear to my heart. Something I get questions about a lot because I had two completely different birthing experiences with both Brandon and Blake. So I want to discuss, for me, what was the difference between my OBGYN birthing experience and my midwife birthing experience with Blake. So first of all, with Brandon, I was much younger, and I never even heard of a midwife back then. You know, he's about to turn 11, so I just didn't know. And I, of course, had an OBGYN, and I did have an awesome OBGYN, I will say. But my birth plan wasn't really, they didn't attempt to really live out my birth plan, or really it wasn't really anything that was kind of discussed, which I should have probably advocated for more of that on my behalf. But the on-call doctor ended up delivering Brandon, and it's kind of a funny story. We lucked out with a really awesome on-call doctor, and he actually left to go to a wedding reception while I was in labor. And when he came back, I was ready to push right then, right now. So he was in a full tuxedo, put some scrubs on and just jumped in. So we say Brandon had this really fancy birth. But with Brandon, I chose to have, all these interventions. I didn't even know what the word intervention meant. I had an epidural. I did things that, my family had all done. I didn't really take it upon myself to do much research outside of, what I had been told. I'm gonna pause and apologize if you can hear my family playing downstairs. Probably wasn't the best idea for me to record this while they're running around like a bunch of crazies downstairs, but hey, I always say this is my authentic real mom life. So when we got pregnant with Blake, many years later, because her and Brandon are 8 years apart, I had been immersed in in this parenting community and writing and attending events and blogging, and I had just put myself in the center of it all and took time to really just listen and learn and make decisions that I wanted for myself, which I think is really important that we all do. Don't be clueless like I was the first time around. Not that it was a bad experience, but it was just, I just kind of went in clueless. So I was very well informed making these decisions, and I, like many, I watched The Business of Being Born. I watched the first one a few years before I got pregnant with Blake. I made Chris sit and watch it with me. I made my mom sit and watch it with me. And then I watched the second documentary, and I just became obsessed with it all. And I would kind of talk about it to anybody who would sit next to me and listen to what I had to say, because I was just so enamored with the business of birthing in the United States, how it's so different here than anywhere else in the world. And the one doctor who talks about this love cocktail that, that happens right after you deliver. And I became so just obsessed with it all, and thinking well, I didn't experience this with Brandon because I had my epidural, and that prevented me from experiencing the love cocktail and, all these things. So with Blake, I was heart set on having a midwife. Now, of course, we know that in some cases to have a midwife and do a home birth, or deliver sometimes at a birthing center or things like that, they can have extra out-of-pocket costs and stuff like that, and that was not something that Chris and I were able to do then. So luckily I did find that the hospital that was near to us in New York City, where Blake was born, is known for having a really great birthing center, a huge midwife support team there, and it was accepted by our insurance. So, you know, I jumped on board with it all. Chris was a little confused at the beginning, but he, you know, as always, just supports my decisions. I think that I explained it to my dad like 10 times and he still like never got it at the end. But my goal was one thing and one thing only: to have a midwife who would back up my med-free delivery birth plan. That was all I wanted. And I focused so much on that throughout my entire pregnancy, mentally preparing myself. You guys can check out my other video about how to prepare your body for labor, and there are 5 practices in there that I really honed in on and I made a priority in my life so that I could make this goal of mine a reality. I had the most amazing midwife. Her name was Annie, and she saw me from beginning to end the entire pregnancy, and she advocated on my behalf every single step of the way, and it was amazing. I feel that between her and my OBGYN, the big differences were that you have more like connectivity time to really sit and vocalize your concerns with the midwife. Again, this was just my experience, but she gave me her cell phone number, text me any time of day. She would answer questions. She was just always available to me, and that made things really easy, knowing that I could ask questions constantly. She knew what I wanted from my birth plan, and we were always talking about what we're going to do to achieve that. Breastfeeding was another big deal to me. I hope you guys watch my I broke up with breastfeeding and it made me a better mom video, because I really go in deep with that whole topic and how I really wanted to breastfeed with Blake, and I did everything in my power to make that happen, and Annie really was there to help guide me through that whole process. I feel like they just have a better bedside manner, and in my experience, they will go above and beyond to make sure that everything happens in order to carry out your birth plan before any type of outside interventions come into play. Whereas, as we know, in the Business of Being Born documentary, OBGYNs tend to not have as much experience with like a natural med-free delivery. They're not really practiced doing that much when they're in med school. So when any type of complications arrives, they kind of rush you off to get that C-section. And I didn't want that. I wanted to be able to give birth on my own terms, and that's what I did. Now, my experience giving birth to Blake was completely different. I labored at home up until almost the very last second. I didn't even get to the hospital to experience their birthing tubs or anything like that. I was at home. Chris was visiting his mom, I think, when I went into labor, and so he had to like rush home, and I was just like laboring at home in the middle of the night, and we ended up having to call an ambulance even though the hospital was just a few blocks away. I just couldn't walk because I was just like, I can't. My plan was to walk. I know that sounds absolutely crazy, but I thought, oh, well, if it's early on in my labor and I'm going into labor at the hospital, I'll be able to walk those like 3 blocks to get to the hospital. Well, by the time you know, my water broke, everything happened so fast, and I got so sick, so we ended up having to call an ambulance and get me to the hospital, and I was the only person on the delivery floor, which was like absolutely bonkers, and by the time I got there, I was in so much pain that I actually was asking for an epidural, even though my goal was to not have an epidural, which was totally a personal thing. Like I said, I had an epidural with Brandon. I don't knock it in any way. It was just a goal of mine that I had, and I was begging for my epidural. I was in so much pain, and they were like, okay, we have to get you through triage and blah, blah, blah. I was like ready to push by the time they got me out of triage, and there was no room for an epidural. I screamed my head off. The one thing I remember from giving birth to Blake, screaming. And the doctor who was on call, so it wasn't my midwife who was there with me, it was the on-call doctor, which I will say, in my situation, not all situations, but mine, it didn't really matter if it was the doctor on call or Annie who was there, because I was ready to push as soon as I got there. So a few pushes later, Blake was born, scraped my head off. They kept telling me to stop, and I'm like, what the hell? Like, I'm the only person on this delivery floor. Let me scream if I need to scream, because for some reason the screaming in my head canceled out some of the pain. But, you know, you get to a point where you just kind of hit a wall, and you're like, the only way to get through this pain is to give birth to this baby. So you just go into survival mode, as you do in so many different situations in motherhood, and you just push, and then your baby is born. So my experience didn't turn out 100% the way I had planned. I did have the med-free delivery. Would I do it again? Probably not. There are amazing women out there who have these beautiful home births over and over and over again, but giving birth to Blake without any interventions was the hardest thing I've ever done, and I felt like I was like on cloud 9, like I was high for like days afterwards, because I was just like, holy crap, I just did something so miraculous. But I don't know if I would ever be able to do it again, though we have no plans to have any more children. Blake is the last Cooper, except for Oliver. So I just wanted to share a little bit more about that. I do have 2 blog posts, one about why I chose a midwife and or the difference between my OBGYN midwife experience, which is really this video is more so about. Just kind of wanted to break it down for you guys. I know that everybody has different experiences, different goals whenever it comes to labor and delivery, and that's totally cool. But I wanted to share a little bit more experience, or a little bit more of my experience, for anybody who might be considering, should I go with an OBGYN or should I go with a midwife? It really is up to you. If I were to do it all again, I would most definitely have a midwife. It was the most refreshing, wonderful experience that I've ever had with a healthcare provider in my entire life, and I cannot recommend it anymore. And having a midwife doesn't necessarily mean that you have to have a med-free delivery. She is going to work to make sure, or he is going to work to make sure that they carry out what your birth plan is, and they take your thoughts and feelings about your experience into everything that they do for you. So that's a huge takeaway right here. So as always, I would love to hear more. Drop me a comment below. Tell me about your birthing experience. I secretly have such a passion for hearing people's birthing experiences, so comment below. I would love to read. Tell me, did you use a midwife or OBGYN? tell me more. I would just love to hear. I think it's just like one of the most beautiful things in the world, and I love hearing other people's experiences. So I hope that you enjoyed. I hope that this information helps you make any decisions that you have about your future birthing experiences. Ask me any questions and I will get back to you all. Blake just came bolting in the door as I'm recording my video. Do you want to say hi to everybody really quick? No. She's whining about something as usual. She came to tattle. She came to tattle. Anyways, with that, I leave you. Bye everybody, until next time.